Hi, class. How's it going? I hope everyone's had a great weekend. We are going to start off today by having each one of you send into the chat something that you remember from our last lesson. For those of you who are still coming into the room, take your time. This is just a get everyone into the room activity. But I'm curious as to what you remember from our discussion on biosecurity and how you think it's going to relate to today's lesson on livestock management and production and the space that we need to give our animals. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to do that while I get this set up. Does anybody have any questions from last week's lesson? Need any clarification on anything that we discussed? All right, awesome. It looks like everybody's got that turned in. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the PowerPoint with you guys for today. Let's see. Awesome. Here we go. Okay, so today we're discussing livestock management, and more specifically, as we get into this unit, we're going to discuss the space that each species needs. So we kind of already did this as everyone was coming into the classroom, but if anybody has any more questions, please feel free to throw those up in the chat. I'd be more than happy to answer them. First off, we're going to talk about bison production. This is really unique, but it is more common here in Montana than where I grew up. So I think that that's really cool. Bison don't need outside shelter. They're really tough. They're really hairy, so they're really warm. It's just not something that they need. Bison do need fences, however. They're, once again, very tough, strong animals. So the fences around their pasture should be made of at least 8-foot-high wires and carry some sort of electrical charge. In addition, you want a 7 to 8-foot-high chute system, which includes spring-loaded locking gates and catwalks. Can anybody tell me why we might want a catwalk in our bison chutes? I know a lot of people think that they might get in the way, but does anybody have any ideas of how they could be beneficial to an operation? Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we want to be, so somebody said that we want to be up out of the way of the bison, and that's absolutely right. We want to give them their space, but also be able to see what's going on. So that's one reason that catwalks are really great. You're also going to want a sorting pin in order to work your bison. For cattle production, I highlighted a couple of these here because those are the most relevant to our assignment for today. But the primary purpose of housing for cattle is to provide shelter from extreme weather conditions. Can you guys raise your hands if you think that Montana experiences extreme weather conditions? Yep, everybody raised their hand. That's right. We absolutely need shelter for our cattle. Ventilation is also necessary with that shelter. But a lot of the times, if you don't have that ventilation, you're going to get odors and gases built up in your barn, which is not very healthy for you or your livestock. So that's something to be aware of. In addition, for our fencing, we're going to want 3 to 5 strand barbed wire for cattle. Your operation should also include a squeeze, a palpation chute, and a functional gate system. I know in a lot of cases, if you have a squeeze, a palpation chute isn't very necessary. You can kind of substitute one for the other. So keep that in mind. Does anybody have any questions on cattle production and their space needs? Yeah, so I know this table is kind of confusing, but if we break it down, this side is for our calves, so 400 to 800 pound animals, and this is for like cows and bulls and steers for our 800 to 1200 pound animals. I highlighted the ones that I did because we're not really going to be, for our assignment today, you're going to be designing a facility of your own, and these three are the most relevant to that project. Yeah. For pork production, moving on, look at this cute little guy. 8 square feet of space per pig is what's recommended. Additionally, pigs require some form of shelter. They do not do well in the cold, and they do not do well with varying temperatures, which we often see here in Montana. It starts out pretty chilly in the morning, warms up, and then gets cold again by nighttime. Pigs don't do very well with that. In addition, pigs are really unique because they're actually very clean animals. They like to defecate away from their food, but they also like to root. So those are two things to keep in mind when considering pork production. You're going to need a pen with some sort of fencing that maybe it's dug into the ground a little bit, maybe there's a piece of barbed wire, or maybe a piece of electric wire underneath your fence. Because what's going to happen is your pigs are going to dig up and root and try to get away, and that's going to help prevent them from actually escaping. Moving on to lamb production. Lambs do not like to be cold and wet. They do not do well when they're cold and wet. So they're going to need shelter, just like hogs. They're also going to need shade in the summer. Additionally, their yards are going to need to be well drained in order to make sure that their hooves don't get rotted or any infection. Lambs like to be secure, so if you can include that they have a livestock guardian dog, or maybe their pen is large enough to give them adequate space, but small enough to ensure that they feel safe. Additionally, you're going to need a functional working area for shearing, doctoring, and lambing. I've separated these just because they all look different. So shearing is kind of rough. You're trying to just keep everything clean. Doctoring, also trying to keep everything clean, but it probably shouldn't be done on dirt like shearing can be. And lambing should be done in a barn. Keep those in mind. So, where are Miss Heirendt's bison? I know what you're thinking. Miss Heirendt, you don't have bison. Well, I did. So I'm going to show you the pen for my bison that I had at home. And as you're going to see, they have food, water, a chute, separate pens, and a rounded alleyway. What else could they want or need? My bison escaped last night. The pen was made of small pipe, but it was welded together, so they shouldn't have been able to escape, right? Each pen is a little bigger than the chute and gives them enough room to lay down in. Perfectly adequate space. I'd like you guys to type into the chat at least one issue you see with this setup. It can either be private to me or to the whole class. Okay, so here's the pin. Let's see if I can doodle on this. Yes, I can. Okay, so I didn't even bother fencing in over here because my water trough was there. It was blocking the way. Additionally, my cows and my bulls right next to each other. Bulls and my calves next to each other. And my quarantine pen right here is next to my cows, calves, and bulls. They get lonely if they're separated, so I thought that was a good idea. This is where their food is. This is the gate in the chute system. I didn't really bother fencing outside of my gate. I don't really know where this whole space goes, but this is my house right here. This is my house. So I didn't want my bison going into my house. So I just spit them out this way. Okay, I'm seeing almost everybody's typed in an issue. That's awesome. Okay. So this follows the state requirements for bison. With the exception of these pins, this is a little over the top. But can anybody tell me, even though this follows the state requirements, like why isn't this satisfactory for the care of bison? Awesome. I'm seeing some really great responses. First of all, my fence was made of a really small pipe, and it definitely, I didn't specify that it wasn't, but it wasn't 7 to 8 foot high. So there's that. Thank you for catching that. I didn't specify. So this space needed to be fenced in, absolutely. Additionally, it's not really okay for this space over here to not be specified what's happening. If it's my property, if it's my neighbor's property, like if my bison come out this gate, what's going to happen to them? Nobody knows. Additionally, they have food, they have water, but they can't even get to their food because of these pins. So keep in mind when you're designing your facility and later on when you're caring for your own livestock, just because it meets the state mandated, government mandated requirements, it doesn't always mean that it's what's best for your livestock. A lot of times you're going to need to use some common sense in addition to just kind of thinking ahead and asking yourself, can my animals get the shelter and safety that they need? Can my animals get to their food? And can my animals get to their water? Those 3 things are your most primary concerns, and you should always think about those at the forefront of your project. Moving on, it's your turn to design a livestock facility. You're going to pick one of the livestock species we discussed today, and you're going to design a holding facility that meets industry standards using the PowerPoint draw or paint applications. Please remember what we discussed. Just because it meets state standards doesn't necessarily mean that it's functional or what's best. So I'm also going to have you label everything that you put in there, label, 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 and you're going to give me a 1-page minimum write-up of why your facility is satisfactory for the health and safety of your livestock. You need to tell me, does it meet the state standards? If so, like why did you do what you did in your draw up and design? And if it doesn't meet state standards, did you do that on purpose? And if so, like why? What was your intention? Did your animals need more space? Did your animals, you think, need less space? Basically, I'm just looking for what you did and why, and labels on your drawing. Those are my biggest things. Awesome. So we're going to move on now to, we're going to keep that. We're going to move on now to a Quizlet live activity. So we're going to do this. We're going to do this as individuals today. And we're going to do this. If you guys have the app, go for it. Or you can maybe hopefully scan this from my computer or use this code to join. Once you guys are all joined up, we're going to play this Quizlet live. For those of you who are just watching me teach this lesson, we're going to go through these questions. It's a summative assessment of the content from today. Do bison need outside shelter? There's multiple choice options. We have 1 question for each species, very short and summative, and then discusses the assignment as well. All right, awesome class. Thank you so much for playing. Does anybody have any questions from today's meeting? I can figure out how to get back to. There we go. I'm not very tech savvy, so this has been a lot of fun, a lot of learning. Class, does anybody have any more questions before I take off today? Any clarity on the assignment, or are we all good to go? Can I get 2 thumbs up from everybody if we're good to go? Awesome. Thanks so much, class. I'll see you tomorrow.